Alright YouTube, this video is a little bit about atheist evangelism. Now, Christians have pointed out before that atheists, hard atheists particularly, they tend to be rather forward in their views. They tend to go after others, to harden the soft atheists, and also at the same time to attempt to convert people in various religious faiths. Christians, Muslims, Jews, whatever that happens to be, that they go out and, whether online or in real life or whatever they happen to do, they attempt to take other people away from religion. Now this is a small portion of the atheists. Most of the atheists in the world are what you would classify as soft atheists. They don't care what other people's religions are. They don't believe in God. In fact, I would say the largest religious denomination on earth would be soft atheism, rather than Christianity or Islam, because so many people which claim to be Christians, claim to be Muslims or Jews or various other groups, are actually atheists. They don't really honestly, truly believe in those gods. They put on a show to be part of a community. They feel pressured into it. They were raised that way, so they just think it's normal. They do all the trappings of Christianity or Islam or whatever, but they're actually atheists. So just a little bit about the idea of atheist evangelism, why we would care as an atheistic community, because I am myself, I'm satanic and an atheist at the same time. I've already explained how I can be both. That is, that most Satanists are indeed atheists, it's just a philosophy. That the atheistic community at large cares about the state of the world, not just about atheists. See, we have two reasons for caring about the state of religion, spirituality, atheism versus theism, and so forth. We have two reasons for being like we are. The first reason is that atheists have looked at history throughout various cultures, under various religious regimes and so forth. We've seen history, and we've seen typically atheists as a group have been oppressed in many ways over history. Now this is true for other religious groups, but individually for atheists, they tend to be highly targeted, highly pressured by outside forces, because of course, if I'm a Christian and I'm going out to convert people, I'm going to go out and try to convert the atheists. I'm not going to go out to a Muslim community and try to convert people because I'd be afraid of them. No one's really afraid of atheists. Everyone sort of uses them as a scapegoat. Hitler often criticized the atheist community and talked about how terrible and immoral they were, how they were, doing all these terrible things, that they were no better than the Jews, and put many atheists into concentration camps, then went on to slaughter, of course, 5 to 6 million Russian atheists with the Commissar order. So we've looked at history and we've seen it's been dangerous for atheists. There was a time in the United States where if you were an atheist, you were less than a second-class citizen. A black Christian back during the slave era probably was better off than a white atheist. They would have been stoned. They would have been hung. They would have been burned at the stake. They wouldn't even have a reason for existing. They would have to live out in the woods like a hermit in order to even survive. It was unheard of. There were atheists around. They kept it under wraps for that reason. We've been oppressed as a group. And indeed, you look at the media today. Look at Fox News. These terrible atheists, they call all of these people on there. Anytime you see an atheist on Fox News, an actual avowed atheist, they're being used as a punching bag by Bill O'Reilly or Sean Hannity or whatever, and a scapegoat as, oh, these atheists, they're just a bunch of liberals and feminists and they just want to destroy the United States. We see this culture of sickness around the Judeo-Christian concept that anyone outside of that religious group is somehow less moral than an individual within the confines of that religious group. That is, that a Christian or a Jew, they're living a moral, decent life. They're good people. They're to be trusted. They are first-class citizens. They should have the right to say what they want to say and do what they want to do. We should have the right to have the nativity scene up. If I were to put up an atheist nativity scene, it would cause an uproar. I live in the most atheist state. I was blessed by the powers that be to be born in the most atheist state in the Union. Did this cause me to be an atheist? No, I was actually raised, and for many years was, a Christian. So around here it's perhaps different, but I've been in the Deep South. I was in Florida. I was in Texas. Trust me, if you're not a Christian down there, you do not fit in very well. And you get this sort of, and well, actually, let me get to the second thing atheists have noticed, the second reason why we care. On the one hand, we care because we've been oppressed over time, so we're trying to change that. We're trying to legitimize ourselves. We're trying to grow as a group and become more of a community. On the other hand, we honestly do care, as any decent human would, about our fellow human beings. And we look at the evils of religion and what it has done to this world. Organized religion. I'm not talking about just people who are spiritual. People who, say, oh, I believe in God, that's the end of it. Or, I go to church and that's the end of it. I'm not particularly afraid of people like Unitarians or Episcopalians. They go to church, they do their thing, and they go home. I'm not afraid of those people. What I'm afraid of are people like, the sort of snake oil salesman speaking in tongues types, the sort of Sarah Palins of the world, the Rick Santorums of the world, who honestly want to oppress people's freedoms and take away their civil rights in the name of a God which they consider themselves to worship. That is, that they consider those of other groups to be less worthy, less patriotic, less American, less moral, less decent than these other groups. And they lump these different groups that they disagree with all together. They say, well, gay, atheist, feminist, they're sort of the same thing. They're all these, questionable sort of anti-American types that we don't want to have anything to do with and we think shouldn't even be allowed to vote. There are politicians, I'm sure, who won't openly claim this, but would in the back room say such things, that they don't even think that atheists or gays should vote. I'm sure that you could find politicians who, if you could get them to be honest, which you can't, would actually claim these things. You won't find any politicians who would say that about Christians, because most of them are Christians and Jews, or at the very least agnostics. Very few hard atheists would ever even consider going into government because they wouldn't be elected. We're trying to get equal representation, equal time, an equal share in the American pie, so to speak, and it's very difficult to do so because of the oppression over time. The idea I saw on the news, it was a couple years ago, it wasn't that recent, but it was fairly recent, that they polled Americans. More Americans had a positive view of Muslims than of atheists. Now, isn't that strange? All you heard about in the news during that time period was Al-Qaeda and suicide bombers and the mullahs and all of these horrible things that Muslims supposedly were doing all over the world, the terrorism and, bomb vests and trying to attain nukes and, oppressing women, oppressing everyone in their path. And yet most Americans had no problem with Muslims, but they still had a problem with atheists. Why is this? And I looked and I asked myself why, and I was a Christian at the time. I asked myself why people were so afraid of atheists. Because when I was a Christian, I never had a problem with atheists. I didn't necessarily agree with their viewpoint, but I had no problem with them because I never had any negative encounters with them. You never hear about atheist terrorists trying to, blow up synagogues and churches and mosques. You never hear about these things. They just simply don't happen. Because there are very few atheists who are that militant in the first place, and the ones that are militants primarily and predominantly go online to, spill their beef about religion. They certainly don't strap on bomb vests because they don't have a promise of 72 virgins when they get to heaven or paradise or wherever. Wasn't that interesting that the Americans had less of a problem with Islam, even though they were terrified out of their minds of Al-Qaeda at the time, than they did with the atheists? They hated the atheists. I'm sure Satanist was even a level below that. But, you look at the world and the way it is. We atheists do care. So if you're a Christian and you see this, the reason that we attempt to convert religious believers away from religion is not because we hate God, because we don't believe in God. We simply don't believe in things like the Bible. And it's not just your religion, by the way, Christians. It's all religions. We go one God further than you. You believe in one God. You don't believe in any of the other gods mankind has ever worshipped. We don't believe in any of those gods either, but we also don't believe in your one particular God. We've only gone one God further. And the thing is this, we care about the state of the world. Look at the way that theocracies are run. That is, governments that are dictated by religion. You find them mainly in the Middle East at this point in human history. Look at what happens in these government systems. Oppression, ignorance, poverty, famine, everything that could possibly go wrong occurs under a theocracy. Because even if you have a dictatorship, a secular dictator, one person leading the country, as long as that individual has half a lick of sense and is even remotely challenged by the populace on a regular basis, they will at least attempt to govern with at least some level-handedness. In a theocracy, you do not see this, because it is the will of this particular deity, any transgression, immediate stoning. That's the way a theocracy works. What we as atheists are trying to do is try to prevent that from happening anywhere in the world. We don't want to see oppression. We don't want to see oppression of Christians either. Now, when an atheist looks and they see in the Middle Eastern countries that the Muslims are beating up on the Christian population, we don't like that any more than if those people were atheists being beaten on, because we've experienced that. Speaking as an atheist, just as an individual myself, I have no problem with religious individuals. I have no problem with any specific individuals unless they bother me, then I have a problem with them. I don't have a problem with the idea of someone being a Christian. My problem extends to this. If the Christian individual is attempting to use some sort of force or power to persuade others to join their religious group just for the sake of their religious group gaining domination and power, that I have a problem with. See, atheists, we don't want other people to become atheists because we want power. We want other people to become atheists because we realize that a very large proportion of the world's population is atheist anyway, and just identifies with religion out of a cultural background. We want to convert those people. I have no interest in converting religious individuals who honestly and truly believe in their religion, and if it makes them happy, that's fine. I would also say it extends to the idea, insofar as those religious people are happy with their path, that's fine with me. When they brainwash their children and psychologically harm their children with fear and guilt, all this hell nonsense, fire and brimstone preaching, and when they attempt to affect their psychologies in such a way that it would be painful for them to ever make the individual choice of leaving that religion, that I also have a problem with. If it were up to me, religious indoctrination of children would be a form of child abuse, and that includes atheism. I don't believe anyone should be indoctrinated into atheism either. I don't want little children watching my videos saying Satanism or atheism is cool and converting. That should be left to adults. Children should be left agnostic until the time they're 18. They should be raised with zero religious intervention, including atheism. That's another point I would make. I don't make a discrimination and say, well, atheism is fine. No, even atheism is not fine for someone that young. They shouldn't even have a notion of what religion is, because until they're old enough to understand it from a logical, historical perspective, how on earth are they going to make a proper judgment about what religion to adhere to, if any, based on the evidence for or against that religion? This is how indoctrination, and here, final point. Christians will say, and you see it all over the Christian-run media, aka Fox News, most AM channels, and a great deal of work online. That's the right-wing, conservative, Christian, evangelical media. They say all the time, well, look at the Islamic countries, and they're brainwashing their children, and they do all these things, and if a child deconverts, well, woe unto them, they'll be cast out from their family, and they'll be, left alone. Christians looking at this and feeling that deep inside emotion that that is wrong are being hypocrites when they don't simultaneously cast their gaze at certain Christian groups which have the same practices, because they do exist. I'm not talking about the Unitarians or the Episcopalians. I'm talking about the Pentecostals and the hardcore Baptists or the Amish. I'm talking about the Methodists. I'm talking about the sort of Christians who speak in tongues or dress in 1800s garb. I'm talking about those kinds of Christians. The fundamentalists I see as my enemy. I don't see deist Christians as my enemy, or Gnostics, or the Unitarians. I don't even see Catholics as an enemy, because while the Catholics have some bizarre beliefs, in my mind they're bizarre, and while the Catholics do put themselves out there to try to convert others through advertising, whatever, they're not a particularly malevolent force anymore. In fact, they're in many ways more liberal than most Protestants are, so I really have no problem with the Catholics or Episcopalians either, or the Anglicans. I see those groups as not much of a threat. Essentially speaking, atheists care about other people just as much as Christians would care about other people. When a Christian uses the idea that I need to convert these poor atheists because I don't want them to go to hell, we want to convert you poor Christians so that you don't waste your life. That's the final word. Peace out.